Welcome to the Performance and Sports Science Study Group, where we show how sports science is applied in real-world scenarios. Today we have Michael Gerhardy. I've been a fan of Michael from afar, following his posts online. I think what he posts is really actionable and really great for practitioners, so really excited to have him here today. He just submitted his PhD thesis, so soon to be doctorate. His PhD research focuses on the role of neuromuscular fatigue in team sport athletes. Today, he will be sharing how to assess movement patterns and neuromuscular fatigue from GPS data. I know many of us here use or have used Catapult or StatSport GPS units to collect data, so I know that this will be really helpful information for all of us. If you guys have questions at any point, please leave them in the chat. Nick and I will get to them at the end of the webinar and we'll help mediate that. And then without further ado, I'll pass it on to Michael.
Beautiful. All good to go?
All good to go.
Excellent. All right. So good morning, everyone. We'll get started. So my name is Michael. It's great to be here, and thank you so much to Daniel and Nick for the opportunity. Currently, I'm based in Tokyo here at the moment, just overseas, promoting some of the work that I do. Normally, I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. So hopefully you can understand my accent. Of course, if you don't understand anything, please let me know. And it is just great to be able to be here with you to tell you how to understand how we can monitor gait and neuromuscular fatigue from GPS data. This is a really big passionate area of mine that I've built during my PhD, and it's just something I would love to share with all of you. So a bit about me before we begin. So I've completed my Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science with an honours degree at Deakin University in Melbourne. Now, alongside that, I've also done a bit of coaching roles at gyms with athletes along the way. Recently, as Daniel said, I just have submitted my PhD, and what that focused on was the influence of neuromuscular fatigue on adaptations to concurrent training. A lot of people think about my PhD as using GPS to monitor neuromuscular fatigue. And that was actually kind of a side project that came about during my PhD, where I realized there was a bit of an issue with the way we were monitoring neuromuscular fatigue in participants. So I thought about creating a side project essentially and trying to focus on that and try and fix a few issues. And this is where a lot of this work has really come about, which is great because now I can share it with all of you. As a result, I've gotten to the point where I have submitted my thesis. I've taken on some consultancy roles with clubs along the way. And at the moment, I am the creator of a software called RunUp Performance. And I'll talk through that a bit as we go along today. What this software does is it basically transforms your messy GPS IMU data into something that's actionable. I'll go through this a bit along the way and show you what it looks like because you may or may not have seen it before, or you want to try it yourself. In practice, it's not always actionable to use this kind of data. So here, what this software does is designed to be easy for practitioners and make this messy data actually usable for you. So if you have any questions at the end about my career so far and how I've gotten to this point and how I actually took the steps to solve this problem, of course, feel free to ask at the end. So if you've seen GPS IMU data before, this is essentially what it looks like. This is a very small snippet of 100 Hertz data taken from Catapult GPS. A lot of people look at this and go, I can solve this data. I can understand how an athlete is moving. But the reality is this is a lot of data from only 0.3 seconds of movement. Now you think about that, that was 0.3 seconds. It was nothing, and you can see the amount of data that we get here. So to understand athlete movement, it's really, really messy and difficult to understand what is happening here. I've had a lot of people ask me how they can use this data to solve their problems. And the reality is, if you look at a 3-hour training session, which is what we do here in Australia in rules football, for example, this data will involve about 10 million Excel rows of data, and that is per player. So you can imagine the amount of stress that would not only have on you, but also your computer. It's a lot of memory to go through there. I've graphed a small section of about 12 seconds from some work I've done in the past. And you can see there, if we look at several axes of our GPS IMU, you can see it's all over the place. You might see some peaks, you might see some troughs, might get something actionable out of this. But in reality, the ability to quantify neuromuscular fatigue based off this data is really, really difficult. It's messy, there's crap everywhere essentially, and we honestly don't know what we're doing. We said this to a coach and said, oh, they moved in this way. They're not going to understand what's happening. So the aim of this session is to really help you understand how we can transform this into something that's actionable. And this is something I'm really passionate about and honestly can't wait to help you do. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a few things. I'm going to help show you the additional insights from GPS that we can gain. So people think we can understand what the player does and what the load they do. I'm going to show you a bit more into how they can actually achieve that. I'll also take you through some of the key metrics we can use from this data that we can get from a GPS and take you through again how we can apply that into real life. There's a lot to go through, and I probably need a lot more than half an hour and 45 minutes at some times. I'm going to take you through one of the most important components and one that's requested most from myself, and that is using this GPS to quantify asymmetries to monitor neuromuscular fatigue, injury risk, screening, rehab, etc. And last of all, I will go through some practical applications as well. Just take you through how you can actually use this data and bring it into practice. Obviously, there's no point talking about it if we can't use it in the real world. So this is really a big component. So what we're going to do is think about how we can understand the concept of thinking beyond the GPS signal and not being limited to what is available on our open field or Sonra dashboards. Also going to think about the most useful metrics to monitor athletes. As we know, there's a lot of metrics out there. Some are great, some are crap, some are great under the right context. So I'm going to show you the best ones to monitor your athletes in the best way. Also going to look at how we can understand the differences between limbs deeper for fatigue monitoring and injury management. And that's been a lot of work I've done in the past throughout my research and also with elite athletes. And then how we can actually bring this technology into an applied environment. So feel free to write down any questions that you have on the way, and I'm more than happy to answer those at the end. So first of all, I just want to clear up a bit of understanding about what a GPS does and doesn't do. This is often quite a confusing thing for some people, and I even had some staff from Catapult reach out to me at one point, understanding how I actually have done this. What a GPS does, of course, as we know, is it collects a signal from the satellite in the sky if we're outside, and is able to collect measures such as our running distance, our velocity, and things such as our changes in velocity, such as our acceleration and deceleration. Now, as we know, it typically collects it on a scale of about 10 to 20 hertz, depending on the GPS that you have there. Now, what it doesn't do is it can't tell you your athlete movement strategy, your running gait, or your limb asymmetries.
Hey, it's okay.
This requires some additional technology here that we can't get from a GPS signal. GPS signal is really telling us what we're doing. We need additional technology to tell us how we're doing it. So often a lot of people think that you can use a 10 hertz GPS to do this kind of work. And the reality is that's not quite right. We need something else. And what that additional bit of technology is simply our IMU that is located within our GPS. Now, not all GPS devices have this technology, but if you're working in high level or elite sports, it's highly likely that you already have access to this. So if we look at our IMU here, it's made up of several components. So here on the left side here, we have our accelerometer. So what this does is it measures changes in acceleration across all three planes of motion. So we've got our vertical vectors, so go up, our forward vectors, and our side-to-side vectors. So really, we're able to get a holistic understanding of how our body is moving in that time. If we look in the middle here, we have what is called our gyroscope. What this does here is it measures our rotation along these planes here. So we might want to understand how a person is moving over time. Where are they going? How they're moving? What is their strength of their rotation there? So it really gives us a bit more of a deeper insight into how someone is moving there. On the right side, we have our magnetometer, and this understands how we're moving in respect to the Earth's magnetic field. So aside from the GPS signal that we get via the 10 hertz data, there is really a lot more insight that we can get if we look at the IMU and understand how they're moving on a deeper scale. Problem is these can sample quite high. So we get these at typically about 1,000 hertz, for example, and then they can be downsampled to about 100 hertz. So if you're unsure what hertz means, it basically means the number of data points per second. So if we look at 100 hertz data, for example, it's essentially taking 100 bits of data per second. So you can really imagine how your Excel spreadsheets would be building up very, very quickly. And if you don't have a strong computer, for example, you're really going to be killing your computer's memory very, very quickly. So once we've got all that, we're now going to transform this into something actionable. So by the end of this presentation, we're going to now transform this data and think, okay, how can we use this and tell all the insights that we need and communicate these to a coach? Let's go through a few metrics. And honestly, there are a lot of metrics that you can get from these here. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to go through the most important ones. And honestly, out of the 4 metrics that I'm going to show you today, there's really 2 that I use that are key to your monitoring. The first metric I really want to go over is our ground contact time. Now, what this does is this basically is telling us how long our foot is on the ground for. Now, how we get that is we can get this through a series of complex algorithms by filtering our IMU data and basically understanding when our foot is on the ground and when it's not. So if we are on the ground, we'll see peaks of acceleration go along the way. And if we're off the ground, you'll see, again, changes in that acceleration. So this is all filtered through complex algorithms in RunUp performance to then get these kind of metrics here. Ground contact time is one of my favorite metrics that is available that I've used throughout my PhD and practice. And the reason why is because if we see an increase in ground contact time, that typically indicates the presence of neuromuscular fatigue. Let me break down why. If we are running, we want to be quite snappy off the ground. Sure, the ground contact time, often the quicker we are. That's key. We see that in the literature a fair bit. If we see an increase in ground contact time, what our athlete is doing is subtly spending longer on the ground to produce more force and therefore maintain or increase their running workload. So areas such as their distance or velocity. So these are subtle changes we may not be able to pick up with our own eye, but the GPS IMU is able to pick up these changes. If we look at a metric or a bit of information, such as a ground contact time of about 0.16 seconds, running at about 5 meters per second. If we do that one session, and then the next session they increase to 0.18 seconds, that's a decent change in their ground contact time. We cannot pick that up with our own eye. We might be able to see it and think, oh, that's a bit interesting. But the reality is our human eye cannot really detect a change that small. So using the GPS IMU to detect these changes in our ground contact time is very, very handy. And often if we see increases in ground contact time in our athletes, it's probably likely there's going to be the presence of neuromuscular fatigue. So throughout all the research, all the studies I've done, all the practice I've done with elite athletes, this is one of my key metrics that I always see. This is really, really important. If you're going to get anything out of this presentation and only one thing, ground contact time is one of your key metrics. In fact, probably the top metric to get insights from neuromuscular fatigue. Another one I want to talk about is your peak vertical ground reaction force. What this essentially is, again, is if we look at the complex algorithms that we get through the IMU data, we can understand when an athlete is in the middle of their stance phase. So what this happens here is when an athlete is running, they'll reach a point when they're in the middle of their stance phase, and we're understanding the peak vertical ground reaction force at any given time. So understanding where it is in that vertical plane. Now, how we get that is we get it through equations from J.B. Morin's work. So a lot of you may have read J.B. Morin's equations on monitoring stiffness in sport from his 2005 papers. Those are key papers there. So if anyone wants to link to those, wants to reach out, definitely look out for those. They're really, really key papers. What we're essentially looking for here is understanding how ground reaction force changes under neuromuscular fatigue. And again, this will typically decrease. This is no different to monitoring force using a force plate, for example. As we all know, if we see a decrease in our force on a force plate, there is a likely chance that they are fatigued. That makes sense. We can all understand that. Same again, if an athlete is moving and we start to see a decrease in their ground reaction force that way, it's again a likely chance there is evidence of neuromuscular fatigue. Now, funnily enough, this is a good metric. I wouldn't rate it as high as ground contact time, in my personal opinion. It's a good metric, but it can be compensated in some way from athletes. And particularly if you've got heavier athletes, they may in fact elicit more force into the ground. So it's a great metric, but it's one that I wouldn't put at the top of my list at times. So it's great and is great use as a supplementary metric, but ground contact time I would still put on the top of the pedestal there. The next one though, I'd put on par with ground contact time. And this is one a lot of people have asked me about, and a metric I think is absolutely fantastic for monitoring neuromuscular fatigue. This one, of course, is vertical stiffness. And with vertical stiffness, what we're essentially looking for is understanding the changes in our center of mass or the elasticity of our body at the peak of ground reaction force. So during our stance phase. As you can see there, we've got on this graph here, the peak of our vertical ground reaction force, and we're essentially measuring our stiffness there at that time. The way I like to think about stiffness is you think of a rubber band. Now, we've all had a rubber band and we've probably all flung it across the room in school to try and hit someone. I've done that in the past. We can be a bit silly down here in Australia when we're in elementary school. What happens here is we get a fresh rubber band, we try and fling it across the room, and it's going to go a fair way. The reason is because it has a lot of elastic energy and therefore can produce more propulsion and go further. Now, if we have an old rubber band that we've had for a long time, losing its elasticity, there's not much in it. If we try and fling again, there's not much going to happen there. It's going to travel a pretty short distance. I like to think of that with our vertical stiffness. So if we see a reduction in vertical stiffness, it essentially means we are losing the ability to produce that quick elastic energy within our body. If we look at something like change of direction, for example, if we are running during sharp change direction movements, and if we're quite stiff, we can accelerate, decelerate, change direction, quick turn, and go off again to chase the ball. This is really key, of course, in sport. If we're suffering from low vertical stiffness or a decrease in stiffness from before, we might be able to do the same movement, but what's going to happen there is we're probably going to be a lot less stiff and have a lot less elastic energy within our body to produce that movement. So you might see sometimes that athletes might crouch down a bit more and really grind in to change that momentum there. That can be a sign of decreases in vertical stiffness. So again, we can get that from the IMU signals derived from our GPS. A lot of people have also asked me about, can we get leg stiffness? You technically can get the calculations, but I wouldn't exactly trust it from a thoracic mounted GPS. Reason why, of course, is the GPS is mounted up here, we cannot move our torso, we cannot move our body, but we can still move our legs. So it's not really going to be sensitive enough to determine these changes in leg stiffness there. And in reality, from the work I've done, leg stiffness is good, vertical stiffness is better. It gives you a much more whole body understanding into how an athlete is moving. So if we look at our metrics so far, I would place ground contact time and vertical stiffness up here right at the top. These are great. These often give you the most amount of information from your data. The final one I'm going to go over is one called flight time. So flight time, what we look at here is essentially the amount of time that we spend in the air. So when our foot is off the ground. So we can look at this from either when both feet are off the ground or when one foot is off the ground. In RunUp performance software, how we define it is when one foot is off the ground. So we monitor it on the stage of when an individual foot is off the ground, simply because we get a deeper understanding into how strategies are changing in individual limbs. And again, we can get these from our GPS IMU data. If I had run this presentation at the start of 2023, so about 2.5 years ago, I would have said to you that if there's a decrease in flight time, there is an increase in neuromuscular fatigue. After some more work and investigation I've done, I would actually say that is incorrect. What we see is that if there is a change in flight time from our norm, then there might be the presence of our neuromuscular fatigue. So I've seen both cases here where we've had athletes have a decrease in flight time and also an increase. So I remember I had some athletes in the past whose flight times were an average, I think, of about 0.410 seconds on their left and right feet. That was one session. You give them some quite hard training, you put them in the next session, and all of a sudden they increase their flight time to 0.44 seconds. Now, this was a bit of a surprise to me because in the past I expected that there was be a decrease in flight time, and I've gone, hang on, if they're increasing, doesn't that mean they're less fatigued? No, not exactly. If we see a change in their flight time, there's going to be an increase in fatigue. So what athletes can subtly do is if they're fatigued, they might try and raise their legs more to try and maintain that workload. If they're fatigued, they might also be unable to raise their legs and move at that time. So flight time is a bit of an interesting one, where if you see a deviation from their norm in either direction, it's likely that there's going to be signs of neuromuscular fatigue there. This is a good metric. I'll probably place it on the lower end of the metrics that we've talked about. So at the moment here, we've got our ground contact time and our vertical stiffness are equal in terms of our measures. Peak vertical ground reaction force, I would place slightly below, and then flight time, I would place below these here. Of course, doesn't mean that flight time is not important. It's really good for supporting and creating more insight into athlete movement and to support your ideas that you might get from the other metrics. It's probably not one that I would place at the top of my list though. Now, before we get into the next few parts, there are a couple of other metrics such as just stride length, step count, step frequencies that can be useful. If you have any questions about that, please let me know and I'm more than happy to answer those at another time or at the end of this. Now, the next part I want to talk about is the introduction to asymmetry. This is really key to understanding what is happening here with our athletes. What we can do with the GPS IMU signals is we can monitor them and get an understanding of how an athlete is moving at any given time. Can we separate these into left and right? Now, this is probably what practitioners are most interested in, and there's several reasons why, of course. If we look at the benefits of understanding this, it really helps us to determine how athlete is compensating under the presence of neuromuscular fatigue. So it's quite common where you might see that an athlete's left side is really good. Their right side, maybe they might have a bit of hamstring trouble, some calf issues in the past, and that might then change the compensation that they have. So by isolating these to left and right, we can get a bit more of a deeper understanding there. It's also great for assessing injury risks from excess fatigue. Now, I have some great case studies, which I'll go over towards the end of this presentation. Many case studies where I've looked at excess fatigue in my athletes, and I can see spikes in their asymmetry flags that tell me there may be a chance of injury from excess fatigue. It's also great to monitor changes during rehab as well. So at some of the clubs I've worked with, we've had athletes who are going through hamstring or ACL rehabs, for example, and they've used these algorithms and this technology to determine how an athlete is running and how they're returning to running. So I've gone over some data with them. Obviously, I am not able to share any of the data with you today just due to confidentiality reasons, of course. But this is definitely an area I think is really, really key. So monitoring these changes during rehab is a great benefit to understanding these differences. Now, the way we do this is something called standardized running protocols or submaximal fitness tests. I'm seeing a lot of work on these over on LinkedIn and social media. You particularly see Martin Boucher and Sean McLaren going over a lot of submaximal fitness testing to understand changes in heart rate responses. We can also use this technology to look at changes in neuromuscular fatigue and asymmetries. Now, the reason we might do a standardized protocol is we want to be able to standardize the distance and velocity to determine how an athlete is running. So a common protocol I've used is a 70-meter protocol. So looking about a box-to-box distance on a soccer pitch. And what you do is you simply have a standardized time where they have to run it in. So an athlete might have to run the 70 meters in 14 seconds, and that'll then be about a velocity of 5 meters per second. So if we have that standardized distance and velocity, that essentially means they are completing the same work output in theory. So therefore we get the what of the GPS. What are they doing? At this point, we are using the GPS signals. We cannot use this to understand how an athlete is moving. What we're really wanting to look for, again, is how they are doing it. So how are they using their running strategy to achieve that work output? So if we have a standardized distance and velocity, over time, if they are changing the way they are doing that, we can then get a real insight into these benefits, understanding the presence of neuromuscular fatigue and differences in both left and right limbs, as well as understanding if they're returning from rehab well or if there's any changes in injury risk. Now, there's great advantages to this one. As I said before, we can use this during submaximal fitness testing. And this is great for several reasons. Athletes love submaximal testing. Why? Because they can talk with their teammates during this time. They don't have to do any max sprint testing, max IMTP testing, nor board testing. We can do this in a really clear and efficient way. And the great way to do this is you can do a protocol for everyone. So you can monitor your whole squad in about 2 to 3 minutes. So the protocol you might take would be about 2 minutes in total for 4 reps of your standardized protocol. I've done a lot of work in this. The record for the amount of athletes I've monitored at one time is 47. So what we had is we had a whole squad in the Australian Football League. So I think we had our reserves team and our first team players all line up, all do it at once. We were able to monitor them at the same time. Didn't have to get them on force plates one by one by one. It's a really great, efficient way to do it. This also means it's low burden on the players and the staff. As I mentioned before, the players love it because they don't even realize they're being monitored. So you might even say it's a form of invisible monitoring, which is a great win for us, honestly. And the staff as well. You can incorporate this into a warm-up and you can just go straight into your main session after doing this. Nothing really changes for the staff and the players. So it's a great advantage. And the final one I want to talk about as well is how we can monitor these movements during task-specific movements. So here we are looking at running instead of a jumping movement. Now, you might be looking at this and saying, oh, Michael's very critical of force plates here and thinks you should bin them. Don't bin your force plates. Force plates are very, very effective. And of course, they're great for neuromuscular fatigue monitoring change in rehab, but they are, of course, looking at a jumping movement rather than a running movement. So I think using this technology is great in conjunction with force plates. It's a great piece of the puzzle and a great addition to our toolbox that we can use. But please don't leave this presentation thinking you need to cancel your Vald or your Hawk Dynamics subscriptions. We need to keep those. That's very, very important. Now, a lot of you might be thinking we do have asymmetry metrics using our GPS technology, and that is actually true. we do have metrics such as our running imbalance percentages, our step counts, and our acceleration loads on our left and right limbs. Reality is, though, these can be quite vague, and they can really create a bit of uncertainty on how to act. Recently, I was talking with some practitioners where they were using running imbalance to calculate someone's return to play following rehab. And it gave them very vague percentages where they might have had an imbalance of 58 versus 42% on their left and right limbs, but it doesn't really give them a quantity on what their contact time is, what their stiffness is, etc. So where they're at that point can be a bit confusing. This is the current approach. The new approach, which I'm very passionate about and wanting to get more practitioners to use, is how we can use the GPS IMU technology to then get a quantity of their neuromuscular fatigue or their changes. So I shared this photo on LinkedIn about a year ago where I had one of my participants doing quite well in one session. The next session, he had a bit of an increase in his fatigue. And you can see why. If we look at session 1 over here, he was quite symmetrical the whole way. So you look at a contact time of 0.153 versus 154 on left and right limbs. On his right side in session 2, it's increased slightly, not too bad, but a slight increase. But you can see there on the left side, we've all of a sudden got an increase from 0.153 to 0.161. Now, rather than using this as a percentage, and which might be unclear for practitioners and head coaches, we now get a bit more of a specific, more quantifiable approach that we can use to monitor fatigue and understand how then we can reduce that fatigue. So what we've got here is a bit of a case study where I've had one of my athletes in the past, and I've used this new software RunUp Performance to monitor these changes in neuromuscular fatigue. What happened with this athlete here was that he was probably about week 6, I think, in an 8-week training block. All was going well. We increased his load gradually, and all was going smoothly. Little did I know that he was actually starting to suffer a bit on the way down. And we wouldn't have known if it wasn't for this here, using this GPS IMU technology. If you look at his contact time asymmetries here, you can see he's fairly symmetrical. So you're looking at really fairly even distribution here in the first 3 reps of his standardized run protocol, apart from that last one, of course. But that can happen in athletes. You know that not every data point that you get is perfect. So I'm looking at this going, that is not a huge concern at this point. I'm happy. He's moving happy. We're getting to the end of our 8-week block. Going to be testing again soon. Things are going well. Enter week 7. Now we're one week away from doing his testing, and you start to see a few flags here. Minus his first rep, you then start to see there is an increased reliance on his left side there. So if we look at that second rep there, you can see his left side contact time is 0.189 seconds. His right contact time is 0.182. Now that's a fair whack that we see in differences in asymmetries. And the problem with that is that one foot is taking a short amount of time to produce that force. One is taking longer. That sort of difference of 7 milliseconds might not seem that long in theory. In ground contact time, it's a decent difference though. So these are things that we have to be aware of, and particularly if we see a change from their norm where they're about symmetrical, and now we're seeing this becomes a bit of a problem. This was his contact time. We then look at his vertical stiffness here. And again, we can see that the roles changed. So his right side is stiffer. So the right side was the one that had the shorter ground contact time. And then his left side is less stiff. So what that means is that his right side can produce quick change direction movements. His left side may struggle. Now, this is, of course, is a problem because in team sports like soccer, for example, you might see players where they notice that an athlete is moving well on their right side, struggling on their left. A common technique in Australian football is to know which foot someone kicks on. So you always go to that side and force them onto their wrong side. This is something else that can happen here, where you may notice that an athlete is struggling to turn on their left side. and then you can force them to turn on their left side. And we don't want that happening here. So what we saw here is that he was really struggling with fatigue. And I did some further investigation in this, and I found out he was actually having a bit of shin pain that I wasn't aware of, and he was trying to keep quiet. As we know in elite sport and high level sport, athletes can sometimes try and push through, have their egos, and just play on. Sometimes we get through and it doesn't always get through. But this is a great way we can subtly report this and try to get a deeper understanding into how an athlete is moving without actually affecting them too much. Okay, so I'm conscious of time, and I know this is one where people probably have a couple of questions. So we'll try and recap and have some time for that there. What I really want you to get out of this is that GPS can tell us more than what we do. As I mentioned before, the signals will tell us what we are doing in terms of our distance, velocity, acceleration, deceleration. But the GPS IMU data can also tell us how we are doing this. So we can get a really good insight into how an athlete is moving and how they are running under a standardized load. If that's changing, then that again gives us great insight into neuromuscular fatigue. We also understand the key metrics to monitor these changes in neuromuscular fatigue. So as I mentioned before, ground contact time and vertical stiffness are probably your top two key metrics there. We've also got peak vertical ground reaction force and your flight time there as well. If you want to circle your notes again, ground contact time and vertical stiffness are your key ones to look out for when monitoring changes in neuromuscular fatigue. We can also use this technology and use this data to monitor limb asymmetries using more specific and actionable data. As I said, some of the metrics that you get from asymmetry monitoring with GPS at the moment, they're good, but they can be a bit vague sometimes and not as specific. This technology and this data enables you to use this and create more specific and actionable data. And finally, we can then apply this knowledge into the field. So the great thing is that this technology can be applied to the field. One of my biggest hates, we'll say, is when we do something in research that is great in the lab and in the field it's useless. I hate that. I come from a research background and I absolutely can't stand that. It's something that's really got me going along the way. But the great thing is that this knowledge can be used in the field and it can be used now, which is just absolutely fantastic. And I love that we have access to this. So really, I showed you this graph at the start. You would have looked at this and gone, what the hell is this? Now we can use this data and use this crap and actually make it not crap and make it usable for our athletes and our staff here. And I think that is just absolutely fantastic how we've now got data that was previously inaccessible, unusable, useless to us, and now we can get an extra layer of monitoring into our athletes. And I just think that is absolutely fantastic. So if you want to learn more, I'm always open for a chat and always open for conversation here. Our software, RunUp Performance, is ready and we are taking on clients and distributing licenses to people. If you want to contact and want to know more about this software or are interested in setting up a conversation and an online demo to learn more, feel free to contact our email info@runupperformance.com.au and I'll get back to you over there. And if you want to follow our journey along in building this and trying to get it out there into the real world, we have our Instagram and LinkedIn page. So Instagram is a really great place where we've got some great content that'll keep being distributed, and we're building that up a bit more at the moment, showing you how we can add an increased layer into our athlete monitoring. We've also got our LinkedIn page there, and I'll also add that if you haven't added me on LinkedIn and you want to follow me and follow some of the content that I put up there as well, feel free to connect with me on there and I'll be sure to get back to you there. I'm also open to any messages on LinkedIn, so feel free to message me if you want to learn more. I think we're just about at the end there. I'm not sure how long that was. It's just under 40 minutes, which I'm pretty happy about. So Daniel, I'm happy to open up to any questions if people like now.
Yep, that's perfect. So if anyone has any questions, now would be the time.
Hey Michael, I have a quick one. Thanks for the presentation. Super interesting to listen in. I'm curious. So obviously you talked about how the algorithms and everything benefit from more of the standardized runs. Trying to do the 70 meters out or kind of staying around that 5 meters per second. I'm curious in your experience for players that maybe you've had run that faster, if you've seen sort of any sort of point intensity wise to where maybe the asymmetries that you would see at say 5 meters per second don't necessarily translate, or you start to see maybe changes at 7 meters per second, 8 meters per second as they kind of ramped up towards maybe more of like a maximal sprint. So I'm curious if obviously kind of outside of the standardized monitoring setting, if there's been anything that you've kind of noted anecdotally of maybe when like the task sort of changes, kind of moving out of that sub-maximal monitoring.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've mostly used this in sub-maximal monitoring rather than max speed because it hasn't been that efficient in Australian sports. For example, we don't like to test max speed a lot here. You might want to do that in American football. I'm aware you do that a fair bit. I have increased it to speeds such as 6 meters per second, 7 meters per second, um, just from my own curiosity. And we do see those increases there. So we do see an increase in asymmetry, for example. Another thing that I also see, and one thing that I'm really keen on getting on into the next version of RunUp Performance, is monitoring asymmetry during acceleration. So typically during acceleration, we do see an increase in asymmetry because essentially an athlete is trying to push up in different ways to create that external workload. The problem with this is it can be done, but it's incredibly messy, time consuming, and not usable in the field. So I've done it when I've had a small amount of athletes, but when I've done it with squads of 47, it's not possible. So at the moment, we're trying to get that into the next version of RunUp Performance, where it'll simply be you upload some data and it'll collect this data from your specific acceleration phases only there. So I think if you increase it to higher speeds, you will see increased asymmetries as well as putting it in acceleration. On that note as well, I've also seen where we have speeds of 5 meters per second and speeds of 4 meters per second. And 4 meters per second is a fairly easy speed for a lot of people. It's not too bad. We still see asymmetries at that point, which I think is quite interesting. So it's definitely one that you can use across a variety of speeds then. Does that sort of answer your question there, Jackson?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi,
Awesome.
Nicholas from here, from
Hi, Nick. How are
Chile.
you?
Yeah, good. That you have you tried this software with the Wemo brand GPS or just Catapult?
So I've done it with Catapult and Stat Sports. I haven't done it with Wemu yet. I'm always open to trying to get more GPS brands in though. I'm currently in Japan trying to implement another GPS brand in here, which I'll get to hopefully the next couple of days. So I'm always open to other GPS brands. So hopefully keep an eye out and there'll be more technology implemented in this here.
Thanks.
Michael, we have another question from another Michael in the chat. He asked, is the asymmetry monitoring app being viewed in live time during a training session on the field or retrospectively after a training session?
It's a great question, Michael, and it's one that I've had asked a lot as well. So this is only done post-session. Unfortunately, with the Catapult and Stat Sports data, we cannot get raw IMU data live. So that's a bit of a limitation of the software at the moment from their end, where we then can't monitor that live. I wish we could, and I hope that sometime in the future we can do that and monitor these changes live. At the moment, though, we can collect this data and then monitor it post-session. I don't think that's necessarily a big problem because I think we'll get to a point where if we're looking at someone's asymmetries, it's unlikely they're going to be at a point where they're so bad that they can't do the session and they're where it wouldn't have been picked up elsewhere. So I think this is great for picking up those subtle changes that we might not get from subjective monitoring or other technology. But hopefully down the track, if we get live IMU data, I'm all for it. I'll be jumping on calls with Catapult and Stat Sports straight away there. So definitely keep an eye out for that if that comes along.
Awesome, Michael. I got a question for you too. You talked about stride length and stride and step frequency during your talk briefly. Is there a reason why you don't focus on those two metrics as much?
They're good. They're not as sensitive though at times. So under standardized protocols, they will change, but sometimes they can be maintained. Stride length is good. That's probably one that would increase, or sorry, change on a similar level to maybe flight time. Probably didn't just have the time to go through it today, but that's definitely a good one to look out for. Step frequency and step count under standardized protocols can remain fairly similar across the board. They're great for, of course, that supplementary monitoring and great for looking at extra data to aid your decision making on the software. But they're not the key ones I would place at the top of my list, if that makes sense there.
Yeah, for sure. So do you also expect less variance with ground contact time and vertical stiffness?
So it depends. So it depends on the context. I would say they can be they can have little variance. So they're quite reliable, these metrics. So if we monitor these changes here, it's probably going to be a lot more consistent and a lot more accurate with that data there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Perfect. Thank you.
All good.
I have a bit of follow-up to Daniel's, if you don't mind me jumping in.
Yeah.
I'm curious of sort of like the actioning of this information. So obviously you talked about some of the case studies of, say, the athlete you were talking about who was dealing with maybe some shin pain that was kind of under the radar. So obviously there's kind of the sensitivity to maybe more like musculoskeletal, injuries or ailments and stuff alongside like the neuromuscular fatigue. And obviously this can just be triaged, with like medical staff and everything like that. But I'm curious of kind of maybe what are sort of like the next layer of context that you might look at. So whether maybe it's like the step length, step frequency, does that maybe tell you a little bit more of like how that player might be compensating to where you're maybe seeing the difference in ground contact time? Or could you kind of talk through maybe what that thought process would be like from, all right, we've, detected this sort of, anomaly in their asymmetry from what we deemed as kind of their normal, what might kind of you look at next to maybe provide a little bit more context of what might be the root cause there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a few cases, and with the elite clubs I've used where we've been able to apply to actually make key decisions. So I remember a couple of examples throughout the season this year in Australia where we had a few players that would be fine one day, and then the next couple of days there would be a big change in what has happened there. In some cases, I've looked at this data and I flagged it with the high performance team straight away because I've gone from an asymmetry of here to here. It's off the charts, and I've gone, what is this? This is horrendous. I report to the high performance staff, and they say, oh, actually, our player just had a corky in that last game. They got it on their right calf, for example. They got kicked in the calf during a match. So that's all fine. They're probably just still a bit sore. Okay, no worries there. We'll keep an eye on that. And then you see it starts to decrease there in terms of them monitoring. So not the end of the world. I have had some changes though, where I've looked at a player and consistently they've been here. They started this season here and they've been around there. But throughout the preseason towards the in-season, they start to get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's probably not what you want when you're about to enter your in-season phase. So we look at this and then I report back to the high performance team and they say, no, this is good. We need to look at his data a bit more. So they might do some more subjective investigation, understand what his perception of fatigue is. I remember I had a player this year who actually didn't have the best perception of what fatigue is. He thought that his body being absolutely cooked and abnormal was actually normal. So we need to educate him and understand what fatigue actually was to him. So he might have been fatigued on a scale of what we might say is 9 out of 10, and his might have been like a 5, for example. So we can, of course, back that with subjective data and also do some more investigation to his GPS data, look at his acceleration, deceleration count, his high speed running, his max velocity, for example. And then if we're doing other tests in the gym, maybe we could use a gym aware or other lifting velocity measures to understand how much he's lifting. And then also, yeah, just keep track of his force plate measures. So this is where we can really use a technology that we already have to aid this decision making.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate the time. We're coming up on our 1 hour mark, so I just want to be respectful of your time and everyone else's time. Now would be the time to plug anything that you got going on. Is there anything you want to let the people know?
Yeah, of course. So I'll go back to this slide here if I can. So RunUp Performance is a software that we've built. Oh, there we go. Yep. So RunUp Performance, we are really trying to use the technology that you already have and apply this into the field. So with RunUp Performance, it's a software that's designed to be easily accessible for practitioners and usable for practitioners. We don't want to be wasting time and making it tricky for people like you. We want to be saving your time. So this software is available and inquiries are available. So please reach out at the info@RunUp Performance email, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and I can share some further details with you there. Our Instagram is also a place where you can DM us. So if you have any ideas or info you'd like, feel free to reach out to us and follow our journey along there. There are also a few other courses I've done along the way. So I do have a GPS course available on Science for Sport. You can also have a look at that. And there's also a few podcasts as well you can listen to. So feel free to look over my LinkedIn, have a look at some of the resources and the content I've done there. But of course, if you want to get more information about software and learning how you can use that with your athletes, just reach out to us there at that email and I can help you with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.